And I was born in a place called Walvis Bay. For me, I didn't feel like I had family really. So I didn't grow up with my half brothers and sisters. I grew up with my brother. My mother was a severe alcoholic who died when I was 17 because of alcohol abuse complications. So from a very young age, we decided she was not a mother. So I loved her, but we couldn't, spend time with her per se. We couldn't consider, I didn't consider her a mother. And my father was a crazy business person who divorced my mom when we were very young. In hindsight, I mean, back then we might have thought he could have maybe given us more assistance, but the truth is he was going through hell as well, as I found out much later.
Did you have a relationship with your dad, or was there quite a gap there?
Yeah, it was. I think it was a bit of a strained relationship. We were in hostels. We lived with our mom. As soon as Michael finished school, he left straight away, and I wasn't very close to Michael either. So yeah, we didn't. Let's put it this way: like no one ever sat us down and spoke to us about what's going on. It was just like put on our plate, and that was it. I mean, this is why I believe I want to connect people with a different journey in life, because I didn't have connection as a child. So I felt very, very lost.
Your dad growing up, was there something that stood out as he equipped you with something for life?
I think, Dad was like, he actually did some amazing things for us. I mean, he was an entrepreneur. So firstly, my entrepreneurial background must probably come from watching him and all his successes and struggles. He was one of those crazy people that went up and down like a yo-yo. But he gave us an incredible amount of freedom. I remember a number of incidences where he really just let us be who we wanted to be, which I really appreciate, because I think that's such an endearing quality in life, and a lot of parents don't do that.
Yeah.
They don't let kids grow up and figure things out themselves. I don't know, I just feel a sense of appreciation for it. He looked after us. He wasn't there emotionally for us. It wasn't really his thing. But we're very close now. I've learned incredible things about him now. He's in his 80s, and I still go like, I didn't know any of this stuff. Like it feels like most of my life I didn't know.
Brian, you are a dad. Tell us about that.
It's a strange kind of scenario. That part of my life, which I'm also incredibly grateful for, and I think both Karen and I, my ex-wife, we always say like we didn't have the greatest marriage, but we produced something pretty cool out of it. Kayla's, an amazing girl, as is Dylan, my stepson, and I'm really blessed that I get to have them in my life in doses that don't, make me go off track at all. And I think, Kayla wants to be an entrepreneur, so who knows what might happen in the future as she grows up.
Did you know what you wanted to do when you were little?
No.
No.
I got into music. My brother was a guitarist. I loved rock music, which in those days in Cape Town was not a very common form of music. And I got into music because it was, like music often is, it's a great form of expression. And I guess with rock music there was an essence of anger. I was like a pacifist, so I was the opposite. I was a headband. I used to have hair, long hair, it was a bit curly, but anyway. I would have been maybe 20 now, 19, 20 years old. And I tried to put on this concert tour, but it completely bombed. I mean, like the only event that was full was the press launch event, which was for free, and every other event we had to cancel most of them. And we knew it was already a problem because we knew we had failed, but we had to finish this one. And the bands were really cool. They just played, with the few people who were there. And that was it. We knew it was finished because we had already decided, and we went back. And there was this kind of real mixed emotion of like weight off the shoulder and complete failure and complete disaster, because the weight off the shoulder was it was finished, it was over, and my dad had offered to bail us out. And the disaster was like, why was it such a failure?
So what is failure to you?
Failure is an essential ingredient to success. And I think I was never scared of failure, because I failed when I was very young the first time. That's why I had to go and work for my dad for a few years, because he had to bail me out. I experienced the pain of failure even before that, putting on a gig for one of my bands and very few people pitching up. That sort of empty, I still remember that empty gut feeling where you've got this whole club and there's like 12 people or something that have come to watch your band. And it's funny because that feeling has reared its ugly head. Even now that we put thousands and thousands of people through, I still have that little feeling of like, oh, I hope people pitch.
And when you started going into the music scene, was there a mentor?
The concept of mentorship or somebody guiding you was never in my radar because I'd never experienced it in any aspect. So I kind of self-taught myself everything. So first live gig, not knowing how to use a mixing desk. That was with my brother's band, but it was okay. They weren't that good at the beginning. Like they were pretty good afterwards. But yeah, I mean, it was literally crash course. There were a couple of I can't think of many people that sort of no one took me under their wing.
So if you didn't have a mentor, then who was your first mentor?
It's all a kind of blur up until about 25, 26, when I met a guy called Emil Ratelband, who's a prodigy of Tony Robbins. I didn't know any of this at the time, but I was part of an organization called Junior Chamber. For us, it was a social organization, but and we got this message from the Dutch chambers saying, this guy's coming to South Africa, will you look after him? And we didn't know who he was. And that's the first time I'd heard of anything to do with personal development or growth or any kind of mentorship. It turned out he was the biggest selling non-fiction author in the history of Dutch literature.
Oh, wow.
He was one of the most famous people in Holland at the time. I didn't get that. I mean, he looked smart, but I was 20, I was more interested in having fun. So in South Africa, I was the only chapter in Durban at the time where I was living that kind of put on an event that he was happy with. And so he sort of expressed that at the end. He was this really big, Dutch guy, and he was like, oh, really, really, really like what you did. And he said, listen, you ever come to Holland, you come visit me, I'll never forget that. To me, that was an open invitation, not knowing who he was, of course, because I hadn't really done a lot of research. And I said, I want to go, because I was like lost and not happy. And so off I went, and I was talking to his daughter because he was in Germany. She said, no, listen, just, come to the house. I'm not sure when he's going to be back. And by the way, I spent my last, money getting to the gates, which were far out of town, just in case you need to know. And then I sort of rang the bell, and his daughter came on the intercom and said, oh no, Emil's only going to be back tomorrow. I didn't have any money to go anywhere, so I went to the forest. I was reading Tony Robbins' book, Unlimited Power. First time ever I've read a personal help book, so I'm trying to, like Tony's hyping me up, and I'm like, and then a little deer came out, started eating. I had this whole conversation. I can't remember what the conversation was about, but it was quite intimate, I think. I think it was one of my first very reflective times in life. And eventually went back to the house, and then, oh, Emil's only going to be here tomorrow. So I'm like, oh, okay, now what? And she's like, well, there's a youth hostel, you can just go stay. And I'm like, so then I had to pack up and tell her that I have no money. And so her brother and her came down to the gate, took me up into Emil's house. He had like about 8 garages, and he had underground garages as well. This was an indication that this is not the person I thought he was. And then his offices were above these 8 garages, and then we went in there, and they found the petty cash tin, and they broke it up open because they didn't have. I loved these kids. We got on really well. They just whatever. They broke it open, take this change out, gave it to me, and said, now go to the youth hostel, and then we'll send a meal to pick you up the next morning. So I was like, okay. And it just gets weirder and weirder. So I stay for a night. But in the youth hostels, then you had to get out by a certain time in the morning. So I think like 9 o'clock, everyone had to be gone. But I didn't know when Emil was going to come. And, and so I was like, no, I can't go. And they said, no, you have to go. You can only come back at a certain time. And I said, no, I can't go because Emil Ratelband's going to come and get me. And they literally laughed at me. And I was like, and I'm like, no, but seriously. And they're like, they were talking in Dutch behind me, And it was the craziest thing because he arrives in this custom-built Bentley, and then he walks through the door and he just shouts at me. So I went from the important guy
to shriveling.
To shriveling down because he's like, what? You tell me you come here, you have no money, blah, 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 and I'm like, and then he just says, come stay with me, and that's, it's the craziest thing. And then I stayed with him for 6 weeks, and there's other crazy stories that happened. It was a weird experience, but the weirdest thing of all is, there were many things like this happening in my life, especially from that point. And I had no indication, I had no inkling in my head that I was being privileged to have these experiences. So that because one day I'd be on stage talking to people and a teacher and, promoting some of the biggest speakers in the world. I think my whole life had been telling me that I'm supposed to do something special with it. And it took until probably last year where I truly believed that I will take responsibility for that. And that's at the age of 48. And it's only much later in life that I look back and realized my whole life was set up where the universe was just saying, you have to do something. I might have believed consciously that I wanted to succeed or that I could succeed with it, but at a subconscious level, because of all the lack of self-worth and all the other stuff that had come out of that childhood and growing up, I think I had to, I could only manifest a failure. And that felt like 20-something years of my life, until I kind of got a realization of that, because I seemed to fail at everything I did.
So when did that change?
In my 30s, I'd always said when I'm 40, I'm going to be in the best financial shape of my life. And I remember coming up with that in my early 30s somewhere. And I mean, I said it thousands of times over. Like, it's cool until you kind of get closer to 40. And 40 was 2 years prior to this. And I remember my 40th birthday like it was yesterday, because I remember waking up in this small little dingy place on a farm that I lived with this 1-bedroom kind of little studio, minute, smaller than this lounge we're in, the whole place.
Yeah.
Ironically. And I woke up in a single bed, like an army kind of style, steel bed. And my little voice was like, hey, happy birthday. How's it going? Like that damn little voice. I mean, it literally was like, and I remember saying to it, I never said when I turned 40, I said when I'm 40. And I just turned 40, which means I'm 40 for a year. And it would have been an amazing story if I got to 41 and was successful, but I was actually worse off when I got to 41 than I was 40.
Oh no, Brian, why?
And so this was a year, so now I was going into my 42nd year. I was going to turn 42 in March. And after the break and the holiday, which was normally escape in those days, I thought, this is it. I don't even want to live if this is what life's going to be like. And it was in that moment, or that moment that was probably a week or two of depression, because when you ask yourself what's wrong with you, your brain's very obliging to tell you how stupid you are. But where I eventually realized I knew a lot of stuff, but my life didn't illustrate I knew it. You won't succeed if you don't believe you're worthy of success. If you don't change up here, it'll never change out there. And I remember saying to myself, I'm going to become a humble student. And today people will see me at an event sitting at the back just taking notes. And they always come, like, it's weird now because I'm better known. People come up to me at events, say like, when are you going to speak? And I'm like, I'm not going to speak. It's like, why are you here? So I just want to learn. And people are like, kind of, they don't get it. Like, why do you just want to learn? Because I think when I made the commitment, that's it. I don't know anything. I don't know anything until my life illustrates that I know it, and so and I'm still, I think like that today, with a very high appetite for constant learning.
I don't know anything until my life demonstrates that I know it.
Yeah. That was actually a saying from my friend, Dr. John DeMartini. It's paraphrased, he said it slightly differently. That's what actually came to my mind when I was sitting there. And when I eventually got over the depression of asking why I was so stupid, I said, what can I do? And I remember John, 5 years prior to that, when I took him around the country talking on wealth, and he said, if you want to succeed with money, you need to learn everything you can about how to make more money, how to manage it better, and how to save it and invest it to create wealth. And he said, you don't stop until your life illustrates that you've got it. And I realized my life doesn't illustrate that I've got anything, everything's going wrong, and my life is illustrating that it's going wrong. When I look back at my life, that's when it started to slowly started to elevate. And that strategy of continuous educational self-improvement is to me the #1 strategy for success in the world. And it's actually been proven through studies that most of the most successful people in the world, 86% of the wealthiest people in the world believe in education, or continuous educational self-improvement. And that's why I do what I do, because I believe this is what people need to do. You need to become humble and go out there and learn and learn and learn it again and again and do it and learn it and do it. And I don't care how long it takes until your life illustrates that it's actually, you've got it.
But it started with the decision.
It's always the decision, right?
Yeah.
This concept of intention, which has been hugely powerful in my life, when you set the right intention, but you set it within the right context. And then, there was a stage in my life a few years after that where it felt like my entire life had been beating me down. Every time I tried to get up, like trying to get up from the ground, and you get knocked down all the time. And I remember saying, I used to stay on stage, it felt like life suddenly put its arm down, its hand down, and said, let me help you up. Before I went to Tony in 2012 early, I went and worked with John. And I'd known John for 5 or 6